Hello, Dr. Mmantsetsa Marope. Here is the Director of the International Bureau for Education, and thank you for your speech that you just gave upstairs. And I just have two quick questions for you, if I may. The first is on the last points that you touched upon in your presentation on teaching and educating the next generations on global responsibilities and human rights and what is global values. Could you discuss what you think are some of the challenges for educating the next generations on what those are, especially given the face of global terrorist threats and the changing face of the ideas on race and religion and diversity?
I think the biggest challenge is actually to inculcate the value of trust in the next generation in the face of violence and terrorism. Because I sincerely believe that trust and respect for one another are key to appreciating each other and the basics on which we can begin to relate with each other. But to teach the younger generations that they must trust and they must value others in the face of terrorism and violence is very difficult. But at the same time, it is the lack of trust and the lack of respect for one another that actually precipitates into the possibility of violence. And it precipitates into the bankruptcy of human values that can lead to unbelievable levels of atrocities, such as the Jewish Holocaust or the Rwanda massacres or the South African apartheid, that when we look back in history, we just wonder, how could human beings stoop so low? What had happened to break these universally shared values so bad that this became possible? The other challenge is to be futuristic and relevant about the future we don't know. Mm-hmm. Right now, we tend to educate young people for what we understand now. But young people are going to leave education institutions in the future. And balancing what is perennially relevant with what is particularistically relevant in temporal and geographical terms is part of the challenge. These are some of the key challenges, and giving young people fulfillment and the opportunity to develop, to be able to contribute constructively, but also to benefit optimally, because all of us love to benefit when we contribute. Nobody wants to benefit without contribution unless there's something dramatically wrong with that person.
Okay, great. And the second question is actually related to your background. And I saw an interview when you were the director of the senior education specialist at the World Bank, that you had mentioned the regenerative capacity that you've worked in through the World Bank, financing numerous initiatives and projects in developing countries, and the importance of the ability to adapt to the national and global context. Could you give some specific examples of successful cases and how you think we can learn from them moving forward?
The case that comes immediately to me is South Korea, for instance. If you look at the development of South Korea in the late 50s, it was quite comparable to a lot of countries in Africa in terms of the level of development and advancement. But they focused on education that is relevant to their development opportunities so much, with resolve, that now when you compare South Korea with those countries that were near equal to it or even better, it's completely night and day. And we talk about regenerative capacity, or we talk about, how do you call it, human resilience. Mm-hmm. It really comes from the ability to learn, because our context will always change, whether it's geographical or temporal. It will always change. But if you have the facility to learn effectively, then you have the agility to adapt. Because as the context changes, you adapt to the context by learning new competencies and applying those competencies in the new context. But to do that, and to have therefore that regenerative capacity, to do that, you need to have a good, solid, quality education that enables you actually to be a lifelong learner. And without lifelong learning, whether we are talking about an individual or an institution, then your capacity freezes at a particular point if you don't continue learning, and then your skills and competencies become obsolete. And that's why, businesses that do not adapt to change go belly up and they get shut, or countries that do not adapt get frozen and they don't develop at a rate comparable to others. But all that development is human resources driven, and it comes from a resolve to build human resources and to accumulate human capital over time relentlessly. So this is an example that comes to mind. You can give other examples: Finland, the US, Australia, and there are many cases of these countries that came from heavy dependence on natural resources, but have managed to break through education and the application of knowledge and technology into the high-powered but human-engineered development that is steered by innovation and is no longer solely dependent on luck, because natural resources are luck. It's just luck that a country can be sitting on barrels of oil. But if you don't exploit that oil and transform it into human resources and build the human capital over time, luck runs out.
Absolutely. Thank you very
Thank you
much
very
for
much.
your time.
Thank you.